calm down right now.
I am calm down to sound. I am calm. You're the one yelling.
Ian.
Charlotte's summer sun poured over Freedom Park, where Nia Thompson, a soft-spoken black educator with fierce eyes and a voice that moved crowds, stood before dozens of students speaking hope into their futures. Her scarf fluttered in the breeze as she said, "Knowledge empowers us all." But from across the lawn, boots hit the grass. ICE agents. A call labeled her suspicious. One officer's hand went straight for the cuffs. She was bleeding before she was even questioned, but they had no idea who she was or what storm they had just awakened. Will truth be enough to break the system this time? If this makes your blood boil, share it now. And drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Justice. June. Sunlight draped Freedom Park in Charlotte like gold paint, soft, blinding, relentless. Children sprinted across the grass, their laughter skipping over the breeze while folding chairs creaked beneath teachers' parents and volunteers gathered for the annual Youth Equity Fair. At the center of it all stood Nia Thompson, one hand resting on the podium, the other clutching her lesson binder like it was a sacred text. Her voice, low and deliberate, rolled over the crowd like a sermon. "Education is the path, not the prize," she said. "And equity means clearing the path for every child, not just the ones with the right zip code." The crowd leaned in. Teenagers, usually glued to their phones, paused mid-scroll. A grandmother in the front row mouthed every word like scripture. Nia, 45, was not a politician, not a celebrity. But in Charlotte, she was legend. 20 years of classroom trenches, 10 years of curriculum reform. Founder of 3 literacy programs. The Charlotte Observer had named her Educator of the Year just last month, calling her the conscience of Charlotte schools. Still, she dressed simply dark jeans, flats, a white blouse that clung to her back in the heat. Her skin glistened under the sun, her long locks pulled into a low bun that crowned her quiet power. Nothing flashy, just grounded. That was Nia, never loud, always thunderous. Behind her, a banner rippled in the wind. "Build the future. Teach the truth." The speech ended to a wave of applause and a few students stood to cheer. One boy, lanky with braces and an oversized backpack, cupped his hands and shouted, "You're our hero." "Ms. Nia," his voice cracked and the crowd chuckled softly. Nia smiled, lifting her hand in gratitude. "Thank you, Terrence," she said gently, before stepping down from the podium. Not far off, just beyond the tree line where the grass met the asphalt of the parking lot, a black SUV pulled in hard, unmarked. Government plates. It idled for a second, then 4 doors opened. ICE agents stepped out in dark vests. The lead man, white square-jawed crew cut, scanned the crowd with a squint. Agent John Pierce. He didn't belong to Charlotte. Didn't know the park, the history, the context. But he didn't care. He was here on a call. A report had come through suspicious activity. A woman loitering fitting a vague description. Female. Black. Possibly undocumented. The informant was anonymous. The description might as well have said any black woman in a public space. Pierce wasn't interested in nuance. He clicked his radio twice. Target identified. Moving in. They didn't approach fast. That wasn't the style. They moved like certainty. Boots crunching the grass, sunglasses hiding the flickers of doubt they weren't allowed to show. Pierce kept his hand near his belt, not quite on his weapon, but close enough to remind everyone who controlled the next few seconds. Nia didn't see them at first. She was shaking hands, hugging students, taking selfies with parents. Her smile softened, years of strain around her eyes. That smile vanished when the agents entered the clearing. "Can I help you?" she asked calmly, stepping away from the crowd. Pierce ignored the question. "Ma'am, we're going to need to see your identification. Right now." She raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me, ID. Papers. Passport if you have it." Nia tilted her head. "Sir, I'm a U.S. citizen. I was born in Greensboro, and I'm an educator, not a threat." Pierce smirked. "Not likely." The park shifted. Conversations froze. Phones lifted recording. "I'm going to need you to step aside," Pierce said, gesturing to the pathway that led to the trees. "Now." Naya didn't move. Her voice didn't rise. "I'm not going anywhere without an explanation." Pierce's nostrils flared. "Are you refusing a lawful order? I'm requesting basic human dignity." That was enough. He stepped forward, and the air in Freedom Park turned cold despite the sun. Naya didn't flinch as Agent Pierce closed the distance. She took a quiet step back, not in fear, but to create space. Her hands stayed visible, her breath, even her eyes locked onto his like a teacher silently waiting for a student to correct himself. Behind her, murmurs stirred in the crowd. A few students edged forward, confusion on their faces. One mother pulled her daughter closer. "I'm not resisting," Nia said firmly, "but I won't be intimidated either." "You fit the report," Pierce snapped. "Loitering. Suspicious behavior." "I'm speaking at an education fair," she said, voice clipped, "in a city I've lived in for 2 decades. Pierce's jaw twitched. His team flanked her, forming a half circle. One of them, a younger Latina agent named Laura Hart, hesitated. Her eyes darted to the banner above the stage, to the children still standing nearby. Pierce barked again, louder. "You think just because you're standing behind a podium, you're above scrutiny?" "No," Nia said slowly. "I think the scrutiny should be rooted in fact, not fear." "You don't get to set the terms," he snarled. At that moment, Terrence, the boy with braces, stepped forward again. "She's my teacher," he said. "She's not doing anything wrong." Pierce turned his glare on the boy, and the crowd collectively held its breath. "I won't warn you again," he said to Nia, ignoring the child. "Produce identification or come with us. I've committed no crime." Nia repeated, her voice louder now. "And unless you're arresting me, I'm not following you into the woods like some fugitive." Pierce's hand twitched. In one brutal motion, he grabbed her wrist and twisted it behind her back. A shocked cry went up from the crowd. Naya gritted her teeth, refusing to scream. "You're hurting me," she said through clenched teeth. Resisting, Pierce muttered as if rehearsing it for the report. "Cuff her." Agent Hart didn't move. "I said, cuff her." Reluctantly, Hart stepped forward. Her hands shook as she fastened the cuffs too tight. Naya winced as the metal bit into her skin. Her binder dropped to the ground, pages fluttering across the grass like fallen feathers. The moment slowed. Blood trickled down Nia's wrist, a red thread winding toward her fingertips. "Stop," someone shouted. It was Terrence again, holding up his phone. "I'm filming." "Everyone is." Dozens of phones were raised now. A father cursed under his breath. A woman near the snack table shouted, "You're assaulting her." "She's a citizen." Pierce didn't respond. He gripped Nia's arm and began dragging her toward the path. She didn't fight. She didn't cry. Her feet moved deliberately, her head held high. Miss Nia Terrence called again. "Don't let them do this." Nia glanced over her shoulder. Her eyes met his. "Learn everything she said." Voice steady, then change everything. They disappeared into the trees, boots crunching against the dirt path, the sounds of summer muffled by disbelief. Behind them, silence hung like fog. Then someone began to chant. "Let her go." Another voice joined in, then another. "Let her go. Let her go." Agent Hart, still standing at the edge of the clearing, didn't join the others. She stared down at her gloved hands, at the blood she hadn't meant to draw. Her lips trembled. The camera phones stayed raised long after Nia was gone. In the grass, her binder lay open, a photo of her and her students caught in mid-laughter, smiling faces, arms around each other, unbroken. For now. The van's back door slammed shut, cutting off the last glimpse of sun. Inside, the air was stale. Metal benches ran along both sides, bolted to the walls, scratched and stained from years of use. Nia sat in silence, hands still cuffed behind her wrists, throbbing. Blood had dried against her skin in sticky lines. Across from her, another woman, Latina, early 20s, eyes swollen, stared at the floor, too afraid to speak. Nia's shoulders ached. Her blouse was damp with sweat and grass stains. No one had told her where she was going. No Miranda rights, no paperwork. Just brute force and silence. The hum of the road beneath the tires was the only sound. Agent Pierce sat up front tapping impatiently at his phone. Agent Hart rode beside him. Her arms folded, lips pressed shut. Why her, Hart finally asked. Pierce didn't look up. Matched a description. She's a teacher. Her name's all over Charlotte. Pierce's jaw tightened. Then she should have complied. Hart stared ahead. You didn't even check her ID. Pierce tossed the phone onto the dash. She challenged me. That's what this is really about. You wanted her to look afraid. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. They arrived at the detention center on South Tryon, a squat, beige building tucked between warehouses. The kind of place with no sign, just a buzz-in door and a flag out front hanging limp in the still air. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed with a cold hum. They took Nia's fingerprints, snapped a photo, didn't offer her a phone call. Her requests were ignored. A female guard led her through 2 steel doors into a dim cell block that smelled like bleach and despair. The guard didn't speak, just pointed to a cell with a thin mattress and no pillow. Nia stepped inside. The door clanged shut behind her. She sat on the cot, back straight, breath steady. Her students' faces flashed in her mind. Terrence's braces. Alicia's bright eyes. Deshawn's quiet determination. She thought of the lessons she hadn't yet taught, the letters she still owed to parents, the grants she was writing to fund books. And she thought of the cuffs, the blood, the silence. Hours passed. No food, no information, just the sound of keys clinking far away and the occasional echo of crying down the corridor. Late that night, she curled on the cot, the cold steel against her cheek. Sleep didn't come. Only questions. The next morning, a different guard slid a tray through the slot in her door. White toast, an egg, patty water. Nia didn't touch it. Her hands were swollen wrists bruised deep violet where the cuffs had bitten in. In another part of the facility, Agent Hart sat alone in a break room scrolling through her phone. The video of the arrest had already been posted. Hundreds of thousands of views. The title read, Icy Cuffs, Respected Black Educator at Youth Event. Charlotte demands answers. She read the comments. This is America now. She's my daughter's teacher. Unbelievable. Fired. Immediately. Hart swallowed hard. The door creaked open. Pierce stepped in. You see this? He asked, tossing his phone on the table. Media's blowing it out of proportion. Again. Hart didn't respond. She made herself a martyr, he continued. You saw how she looked at me. Like I was beneath her. She looked like someone who's had to hold her ground her whole life, Hart said quietly. Pierce narrowed his eyes. You turning soft? No, she said, standing. Just not blind. Back in her cell, Nia traced the lines of old graffiti on the wall names etched by others who'd come through and vanished. Her hand hovered above the steel. She didn't carve her name. She didn't need to. Because she was going to walk out of there with her name louder than ever, and the world would know it. Word of the arrest spread faster than fire in a dry forest. By mid-morning, the video of Nia being cuffed had made it to every local news station. Channel 9 led with a headline that roared across screens, Beloved Educator, detained by ICE. No charges filed. Clips of her bloodied wrists, her calm refusal, and the anguished shouts of students at Freedom Park were broadcast alongside past footage of her winning the Charlotte Excellence in Teaching Award. Parents stormed school district offices. Students wore black armbands. Teachers walked out of classrooms in protest. And at the edge of uptown Charlotte, in a modest law office tucked between a dentist and a check-cashing store attorney, Kendra Blythe closed her laptop and stood up. Get me everything on the Nia Thompson case, she said, voice low and electric. Her intern, Jalen, blinked. Everything. Yes, education records award statements. We're going to war. Kendra didn't know Nia personally, but she knew injustice. She'd grown up in the same neighborhoods where Nia had taught, and she'd built her career on one truth: when the system gets too loud, someone has to shout louder. Meanwhile, inside the detention center, Nia sat with her back against the cold wall legs stretched across the cot. She still hadn't been told why she was there. No officer had looked her in the eye since that first night. Her wrists throbbed where the cuffs had cut skin, but her spine stayed straight. At 1:17 p.m., a guard opened the slot in her cell door. Visitor. Nia was led through dim corridors to a cramped interview room. 2 cameras blinked red in the corners. She sat across from a glass wall, hands folded neatly in front of her. Then Kendra entered. She didn't offer a handshake, just placed a thick folder on the metal table and looked Nia in the eye. "You don't know me," Kendra said, "but I know you. My niece had you for English Lit. Still talks about you like you're Harriet Tubman and Maya Angelou combined." Nia gave a tired smile. "That's generous. You inspired her. You don't know the power you have, but I do." Nia studied her. "So why are you here?" "Because you shouldn't be." Kendra opened the folder. "I have statements from 6 eyewitnesses, 3 faculty members, a copy of your birth certificate, and your full employment history. The city is already choking on this story. All we need now is your signature, and I'll have this on the judge's desk by sunrise." Nia looked down at the papers, then back up. "They won't admit they were wrong." "They won't need to," Kendra said, "because by the time I'm done, their silence will be the loudest confession." Back in the IC administrative wing, Agent Laura Hart stared at her screen. The video had hit 1 million views. A headline flashed, "Educator or Enemy, ICE under fire." Pierce stormed in. "Have you seen this garbage?" Hart didn't look up. "The truth isn't garbage. She's playing the victim. She bled," Hart snapped. "In front of children." Pierce's eyes burned. "She challenged authority. She challenged abuse." The words landed like a slap. Pierce's fists clenched. "If you don't like how I handle my job, file a report." Hart stood. "Maybe I already did." Across town, students gathered outside City Hall holding cardboard signs that read, "Free Nia," and "Education is not a crime." The chants grew louder, spilling into traffic. Inside her cell, Nia sat in stillness. She heard footsteps, distant at first, then louder. The door opened. Thompson, the guard, said tone flat. Nia rose slowly. "You're being moved." She gathered her things, what little she had, and stepped into the hallway. No cuffs this time. Just silence. And in that silence, something had begun to shift. Nia stepped into a different cell block, one designed for administrative holds. It had better lighting, a bunk with a pillow, and no mold along the walls. But it wasn't freedom. It was a stall in a system that didn't know what to do with her. She sat quietly on the edge of the bed, watching a fly circle the ceiling. Her wrists were bandaged now, loosely. A nurse had finally seen her but never said a word. Just cleaned the wounds like she was wiping counters, not caring who bled or why. Hours passed. Then came the clatter of keys again. Another knock. Another door opened. "Nia Thompson," a voice called. She stood. A tall, black man in a charcoal suit waited in the hallway. Sharp-lined jaw, glasses, confident without arrogance. He held up a badge. "I'm Agent Darius McCall, Department of Homeland Security." Nia frowned. "Am I being transferred again?" "No," he said. "You're being released." Her eyes narrowed. "Why? Because you never should have been here." She followed him down a long corridor to a small side room with a folding table, 2 chairs, and a manila envelope with her name on it. Inside, McCall said, holding the door, "You've got an advocate on the outside. A good one." Kendra Blythe was waiting with documents in hand, eyes sharper than ever. "They finally caved," Kendra said. "But don't thank them. Thank the thousands of people chanting your name outside this building." Nia blinked. "Thousands?" Freedom Park's been packed for 2 days. Teachers, students, reporters, even the city council showed up. Nia lowered herself into the chair, her legs suddenly weak. She touched the bandage on her wrist, then the papers. "This isn't over," she whispered. "No," Kendra agreed. "It's just the beginning." McCall cleared his throat. "There's one more thing." Nia looked up. "Someone from your case team leaked internal comms. Said the targeting wasn't random. Said your name was flagged." Nia froze. Flagged for what? Public influence. Online visibility. Educational activism. Kendra leaned forward. "They're profiling teachers now?" McCall hesitated. "Unofficially, some agents believe. Education reformers challenge cultural compliance." Nia closed her eyes. "So teaching black children the truth is now cause for detainment." McCall didn't answer. Kendra stood, voice rising. "We're going public, not just with the arrest, with the algorithm, the profiling, all of it." McCall raised both hands. "I'm on your side." That leak came from someone inside who couldn't take it anymore. Nia met his eyes. "Who?" McCall glanced around, lowered his voice. "An agent named Hart." Kendra smiled slowly. "We'll be in touch with her." An hour later, Nia walked out into the sun. The crowd roared. Cameras flashed. Reporters surged forward. Microphones stretched out like hands reaching for truth. But Nia didn't speak. She looked for the children, found Terrence near the front. He waved, eyes bright with hope and tears. She waved back, then stepped onto a small stage someone had set up near the park bench she'd once spoken from. The crowd hushed. "I was taken without cause," Nia said, voice clear. "But I'm not the only one. There are names we don't know, faces no one filmed, people still inside those walls." She paused, eyes sweeping over the faces. "This isn't about me. It's about us. About what kind of country we're choosing to be." A long silence. Then she added, "Education is justice, and we will teach it." The crowd erupted. Behind her, Kendra watched with folded arms, already planning the next step. And, in a quiet ICE office miles away, Laura Hart stared at her own reflection in a black monitor screen. She reached for her badge, then slowly slid it across the desk. The system had turned on itself, and justice was waking. The next morning, headlines plastered the country. IC detains beloved Charlotte educator, public outrage erupts. National figures chimed in. Educators in other cities marched in solidarity. It was no longer a Charlotte story. It was an American one. In her quiet living room, Nia sat with a cup of chamomile, hands trembling around the ceramic. Her mother, Etta, sat across from her knitting without looking up. "You gonna cry?" Etta asked gently. "No," Nia whispered. "I've done enough of that." Etta didn't press. She let her needles do the talking, the soft click of yarn against metal filling the silence like a heartbeat. Nia finally looked up. "Mama, how did you survive back then, when they called you names? Shut doors in your face." Etta's fingers paused. "I remembered who I was, and I didn't let them write my story." Nia blinked hard. "I forgot that for a minute." Etta leaned forward, placing her weathered hand over her daughter's. "Then write it again." At City Hall. Kendra Blythe stood behind a podium with the Charlotte skyline rising behind her. She held up documents with highlighted ICE policies, racial profiling stats, and leaked emails from inside the agency. "The system failed Nia Thompson," she declared. "And it's not the first time. But this time we have names, faces, timestamps. We are filing a civil rights lawsuit against Agent John Pierce, and we're calling for a federal review of all ICE detainments in North Carolina from the past 2 years. Gasps rippled through the press. Behind her, a few teachers stood in quiet formation. One held a sign that read, "Teach truth, not fear." Inside the IC regional office, Agent Pierce sat alone in a conference room, jaw-clenched, a legal advisor murmuring beside him. "You brought attention to us. We didn't need," the advisor said. "I followed protocol," Pierce barked. "The woman was born in Greensboro," the advisor replied. "We're not defending that." Pierce stood abruptly. "She disrespected me. Or maybe she just didn't fear you came a voice from the doorway." It was Hart, badge in hand, resignation letter in the other. She walked in slowly, gaze level. "You're done, John," she said. "The Bureau's opening an internal investigation, and you'll be the first name they call." Pierce's face flushed. "This is mutiny." "No," Hart said. "This is accountability." She placed the letter on the table, turned, and walked out. Her steps echoed down the hallway, each one louder than the last. That evening, Naya sat on her porch as a golden light spilled across the street. Children played in the background. A breeze picked up rustling the wind chimes she hadn't heard in weeks. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Kendra. "They're backing down. You've shifted something real." Nia stared at the screen, then slowly typed, "I want to do more than shift it. I want to fix it." She placed the phone down, stood up, and walked inside. Her bookshelf was covered in sticky notes, lesson plans, proposals half-written and abandoned in the chaos. She pulled one down, read it, then reached for a pen. By morning, she'd sent out a proposal for a national education initiative, one focused on truth-telling, community engagement, and racial equity. She called it Teach Loud. The next day, the email responses flooded in. Superintendents, nonprofits, civil rights groups, even college deans. And buried beneath those replies, one message stood out, from a name she didn't recognize. Subject: I was the agent who filmed everything. It was short. I hesitated. I didn't stop it, but I knew it was wrong. I hope this helps make it right. L. Hart. Naya exhaled deeply, and somewhere between grief and gratitude she smiled, not because justice had been done, but because justice had finally stood up. Freedom Park was quiet again. 3 days after Nia's release, the grass had been cleaned, the protest signs gone. But something had stayed behind, a weight invisible but unshakable. The memory of injustice hung in the air like humidity clinging to everything. Terrence sat alone on a bench near the podium where Nia once stood. His backpack slouched beside him. He stared at the spot where she'd been tackled. He opened his phone and scrolled to the video. Paused on the frame where Agent Pierce clenched her wrist. Rewound. Paused again. Her eyes had never dropped. Not once. Behind him, footsteps crunched on the gravel path. Errands. He turned. It was Ms. Nia in a soft blue dress and white sneakers holding 2 bottles of water. He stood too fast. Miss Nia. "I thought I might find you here," she said, sitting beside him. He lowered his head. "I should have done more." She smiled gently. "You did what mattered. You saw me. And you told the truth." He looked down at his hands. "I want to help more. I don't want this to be it." She handed him a flyer from her tote bag. Youth Voices Coalition. Speak, change, lead. "I think you're ready," she said. Meanwhile, across town, Kendra sat at her office desk, staring at a court filing stamped in bold black ink. Thompson v. Pierce et al. Beside her was a stack of affidavits. 1 from Terrence, 2 from teachers, dozens from community members, and 1 more from a former federal agent, Laura Hart. Hart's statement was clear. She'd seen patterns. She'd kept silent. But Nia's arrest had broken the spell. They targeted her for her impact, the statement read. She wasn't a threat. She was a mirror. By the next morning, the civil suit hit every news cycle. CNN, MSNBC, local affiliates. Even conservative outlets picked it up trying to spin the angle. But the footage was too raw. The facts too hard to twist. Pierce was placed on leave pending investigation. DHS confirmed an internal review of IC's Charlotte operations. And then came the counterpunch. Nye received an anonymous email. The subject line read, "Wake up." Attached was a spreadsheet, hundreds of rows. Dates, names, race, detainment reasons, most marked with the same code, public risk, influence. Nia's heart pounded. The names were mostly black. A few Latinx, some immigrants, yes, but many U.S.-born. Most worked in community services, teachers, counselors, nonprofit leaders. It was profiling, coded, sanitized, institutional. She forwarded the file to Kendra without a word. By nightfall, the Observer ran it under a banner headline, "ICE flagged black educators as risks in internal database." Calls came in from D.C., from New York, from Oakland. Nia couldn't sleep. She sat at her dining table, elbows on wood, staring at the flicker of candlelight. Her voice memo recorder blinked red. She spoke softly. "They don't come for us with hoods anymore. They come with policies, with badges, with keyboards, and when we speak they call it disruption. But silence, that's how they win. So I won't be silent. Not ever again." She tapped stop. The next morning she posted the clip. It was shared 50,000 times in 4 hours. Teachers in Detroit and Baton Rouge and Tulsa reposted it under the same hashtag #TeachLoud. It was no longer a protest. It was a movement, and somewhere in an ICE field office a junior analyst quietly printed their resignation letter, slid it into an envelope, and whispered the same words Nia had once told Terrence: "Learn everything. Then change everything." Justice wasn't just knocking. It was pushing the door off the hinges. Terrence sat in the back row of the city's public forum, bouncing his leg nervously. He'd never been to a government meeting before, but tonight the room buzzed with the kind of tension you could feel in your teeth. Parents, students, teachers, activists, they all packed into the cramped hall, their voices barely contained by the order of the agenda. Councilwoman Darla Monroe tapped the microphone. Next speaker, Ms. Nia Thompson. A hush fell as Nia stepped to the podium. She wore a black blazer over a red blouse, her hair in a simple twist. No jewelry, no slogans, just presence. She looked every council member in the eye before speaking. "My name is Nia Thompson," she began. "I was wrongfully detained by ICE while speaking at a youth education event, not because I committed a crime, but because I matched a description: a black woman standing still." A murmur swept through the room. "What happened to me is part of something larger. The city, like so many others, has systems built to disappear people who challenge power. And right now, those systems are operating in our schools, our streets, and yes, in our government buildings." Monroe leaned forward. "Ms. Thompson, we're aware of the incident. We're conducting a review." "With respect," Nia interrupted, "your review won't reach the kids who saw me bleed. It won't erase what's already been uploaded, shared, and etched into their memories." She held up the spreadsheet. "This document," she said, "was leaked to me. It lists names of public servants labeled as public risks by ICE. Most of them are educators. Most of them look like me. Many are from Charlotte." Gasps rippled. Council members glanced at each other. One adjusted his tie. Another scribbled notes furiously. "I'm not here to ask for sympathy." Ye continued, "I'm here to demand action, transparency, independent oversight of IC cooperation within our city, a freeze on all joint task force activity until this system is audited, and the creation of a permanent civic justice board led by community members, not just elected officials." She let that settle in. Terrence stood up in the back. I second that he called out. Others joined him. I second it. Me too. The room erupted in support. Monroe banged her gavel for order, but the tide had turned. Something had shifted, and everyone in the room could feel it. Later that night, Nia stood under the streetlight outside City Hall, breathing in the heavy scent of magnolia trees. Kendra stepped up beside her, arms crossed, watching the crowd slowly disperse. "You hit them where it hurt," Kendra said. They needed to hear it. Kendra handed her a folded document. "Then let's make sure they can't ignore it. I filed the federal complaint tonight." Nia unfolded the page, her name at the top, her voice now in the legal record. "What happens next?" she asked. "We get subpoena power," Kendra said, "and we make every policy official involved explain their silence under oath." A car honked nearby. Terrence jogged over. "I just wanted to say, thanks," he said, eyes wide, "for not backing down." "I did once," Nia replied softly, "but I won't again." He smiled, then took out a small notebook from his backpack. "I've been writing stuff. Speeches, poems, about all this. Could I show you sometime?" She placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'd be honored." Back at the Ace Field office, Agent Pierce sat alone at his desk, the room, dim as laptop, open to a news article titled, "Thompson Demands Justice and the City Listens." He slammed the lid shut, jaw tight. In the hallway, voices buzzed talk of resignations, leaks, and outside investigators. He wasn't the hunter anymore. He was being hunted. And this time, the law was looking back. Nia stood at the edge of the courthouse steps as storm clouds gathered overhead, thick and gray. Her breath curled in the humid air. The weight of what she was about to do pressed heavy on her shoulders, but she didn't bend. Kendra stepped beside her, heels clicking against the stone. She carried a leather binder with tabs sticking out in every direction. "The press is already inside," Kendra murmured. "And the judge. He's got a track record of defending institutions. Be ready." "I'm not afraid of a courtroom," Nia said. "I've taught in cafeterias louder than this." Kendra chuckled, but her smile didn't last long. Pierce filed a motion to suppress Hart's testimony. "Claims it's retaliatory and irrelevant." She saw what happened. He knows that. That's why he's scared of her. They walked into the building together. Marble floors, echoing steps, metal detectors. Terrence sat quietly with a few of Nia's former students in the front row, holding hand-lettered signs, "Justice for Ms. Nia" and "Educate, Don't Detain." The hearing began with formalities. Pierce sat stone-faced beside his government-appointed lawyer, jaw set, tie perfectly straight. His eyes barely glanced at Nia. Kendra rose first. "Your Honor," she began, "we are not here today to make a speech. We are here because my client, Nia Thompson, was targeted not for any crime, but for her presence, her voice, and her profession." She handed over the spreadsheet. "This internal list," she said, tapping it, "flagged my client under a code that has never been explained. It labeled her a public risk for being an educator who speaks on equity. What kind of country detains teachers for doing their jobs?" Pierce's lawyer objected, citing lack of precedent and alleged leaks. Then Agent Hart was called to the stand. She walked in wearing civilian clothes, no badge, her hair pulled back. She looked tired but resolute. She raised her right hand and swore in. Kendra approached. "Agent Hart, on the day of Miss Thompson's arrest, did you believe she was a threat?" "No," Hart said, clear and steady. "Did you believe she was undocumented?" "No." "Then why was she detained?" Hart paused. Because Agent Pierce was angry that she didn't back down. He interpreted her calmness as defiance. "Did she resist?" "No. She stood her ground." "That's not the same as resisting." Pierce shifted in his seat. "And the spreadsheet. Did you see it before Ms. Thompson's arrest?" Hart nodded. "Yes. I flagged it internally months ago. Nothing was done." "Why speak now?" "Because I saw a woman humiliated, wounded, and silenced. And I saw children watching it happen. I couldn't stay quiet." When court recessed, the hallway buzzed with reporters. Terrence caught Nia's eye. "You were amazing in there." Nia crouched beside him. "You saw me fight. That means you'll know how to fight too. You already taught me that, he said, and hugged her. Outside, rain began to fall. Light at first, then steady. It pattered on the sidewalk, on the signs, on the shoulders of every person waiting for her outside the courthouse. Pierce exited minutes later. Cameras flashed, questions flew, but this time he had no words. A woman shouted, "Would you cuff her again if you had the chance?" Pierce turned but didn't answer. A voice called from the crowd, strong, certain. No answer is still an answer. The crowd clapped. Naya stepped into the rain, slow and centered. Reporters surged forward. "What would justice look like for you, Ms. Thompson?" She looked up at the sky. "Justice isn't about punishing one man," she said. "It's about changing the system that gave him power without question." Then she turned to the crowd, rain tracing lines across her face. "And I plan to change it." The courtroom ruling came quietly, no cheering, no headlines shouting, "Victory." But it hit harder than any protest chant. The judge denied Pierce's motion to suppress Agent Hart's testimony. The spreadsheet was ruled admissible. The civil suit would move forward. Pierce left the courthouse with his collar loosened and sweat darkening his back. His attorney said nothing. His agency said even less. Behind closed doors, DHS launched an internal ethics review, and in public, they distanced themselves. Kendra stood at the base of the courthouse steps reading the ruling aloud, surrounded by reporters. "This case will not be dismissed. The people's evidence will be heard, and the question of systemic bias will be judged in a court of law, not just the court of public opinion." Naya listened from behind her sunglasses, calm but alert. It wasn't over, but the system had blinked, and she saw a sliver of light. That same week, Agent Hart received a certified letter at her doorstep. It wasn't from DHS. It was from a public education coalition offering her a role in training federal agencies on cultural competency and de-escalation. She stared at it for a long time, then picked up the phone. "I accept," she said, "and I want to start in Charlotte." Meanwhile, Terrence stood on a temporary stage in front of his school's gymnasium holding a microphone with both hands. "My name is Terrence Miller," he began. "I saw my teacher handcuffed for telling the truth, and I saw people try to pretend like nothing happened. But something did. I saw what it means to resist not with fists, but with facts." Parents wiped away tears. Faculty nodded. The principal stepped forward and announced a new student leadership council with Terrence appointed as founding chair. In the months that followed, things moved faster than anyone expected. The city council passed a transparency ordinance requiring law enforcement agencies to publish all cooperative agreements with federal entities. A civilian oversight board was formed. Nia was named to lead it. Teach Loud launched statewide. Dozens of educators inspired by her story applied to pilot new history curriculums centered on community narratives, truth-telling, and resistance. At home, Nia finally unpacked the suitcase she hadn't touched since the day of her arrest. She folded her blouse with careful hands and tucked away the binder she'd once clung to in the grass. Not because she wanted to forget, but because she had built something new from that moment. One night, sitting with Etta on the porch, she asked quietly, "Mama, did I do it right?" Etta rocked in her chair, watching the sky dim into purple. "You stood in front of the fire and didn't run," she said. "That's always been right." A few weeks later, a letter arrived. It was from the National Education Alliance. "We are honored to inform you," it read, "that you have been selected to receive the Educator of Courage Award in recognition of your service, your voice, and your commitment to justice." There would be a ceremony, a gala in D.C., but Nia didn't care about the spotlight. She cared about the students she hadn't yet met, the stories still silenced, the systems still intact. Because her work wasn't done. Justice, she'd learned, wasn't a finish line. It was a discipline. It was showing up after the cameras left. It was rewriting what they tried to erase. And, for the first time in a long time, Nia Thompson felt something deeper than hope. She felt ready. The federal investigation into ICE's Charlotte operations had grown teeth. What began as a civil rights lawsuit cracked open a deeper rot. Internal memos, employee complaints, and encrypted messages surfaced. The public risk code had been used in multiple regions, always vague, always disproportionately tied to Black community leaders. In Washington, the Department of Homeland Security called for an emergency oversight hearing. Nia received the invitation herself, hand-delivered by courier. She sat in her home office, the letter trembling in her fingers. Her name on the federal stationery. Not as a defendant, not as a suspect, but as a witness. A voice. Kendra was on the phone with her an hour later. "This is national now. Are you ready? I've been ready since Freedom Park." The morning of the hearing, she flew into D.C., wearing a navy blazer, soft gray slacks, and a quiet fire in her eyes. She walked into the chamber alone. But she wasn't alone. Behind her were names, those who couldn't be there, those who never got a voice, and Terrence, who had written her a card the night before. "Speak like you're in class," he'd scribbled. "We're all watching." The hearing room smelled like polished wood and cold air. Senators sat high behind the dais, flanked by aides and journalists. Cameras pointed straight at her. She raised her right hand, swore to tell the truth, sat down. Her voice didn't waver. "My name is Nia Thompson," she began. "I'm an educator, and I was labeled a threat because I believed every child should be taught the full story of this country." She described her arrest, the spreadsheet, the coded flags, the bruises. She spoke of Terrence, of Agent Hart, of her mother's hands. And then she looked directly into the lens of the camera. "This isn't just about me. It's about every teacher too afraid to speak up, every student who watches and wonders if they'll be next, and every system that operates behind closed doors, assuming no one will shine a light." One senator leaned forward. "Ms. Thompson, in your opinion, what allowed this to happen?" She took a breath. Silence. And convenience. Another asked, "What do you want to see change?" "I want oversight. I want transparency. And I want every agency that carries power to be forced to remember the people they serve." When she finished, the room held a silence that wasn't uncomfortable. It was reverent. Later that night, back in her hotel, she opened her phone and saw the clip already going viral. "This is the teacher America needs. I'm crying. I'm learning. Protect Black educators." Kendra called her again. "You made history today. I just told the truth," Nia said. "That's what history needs." The next day, Agent John Pierce was formally suspended without pay. DHS released a statement condemning the use of unauthorized surveillance tools and pledged a task force to audit risk labeling practices. And Agent Laura Hart, now speaking openly, was invited to co-chair the audit. Charlotte erupted in celebration. Terrence read Nia's testimony aloud at school over the PA system. Teachers clapped in the hallways, parents wept in cars. Freedom Park put up a temporary banner that read, "She stood, so we could." That evening, Etta pulled Nia into a long embrace. "You did it, baby," she whispered. "No, Mama," Nia said, voice thick with gratitude. "We did." Etta chuckled. "Lord knows I didn't step in that courtroom, but you stepped into every moment that raised me for it." Outside, lightning cracked across the sky, but Nia felt no fear. Let the storm come. She wasn't weathering it anymore. She was naming it and reshaping the ground it struck. Months passed, but the impact didn't fade. If anything, it spread. Teach Loud became more than a curriculum. It became a movement. Districts in Atlanta, Chicago, and Oakland adopted Nia's framework. Her model included not just historical truth-telling, but trauma-informed teaching and restorative justice circles. She traveled from school to school, never as a celebrity, always as a teacher first. Everywhere she went, kids recognized her. Teachers hugged her. And in quiet corners, custodians, cafeteria workers, and bus drivers whispered thank yous that came from deep, personal places. One morning in March, Nia received a letter forwarded from the governor's office. It was from a girl in El Paso. "I saw you on YouTube," the letter read. "My teacher showed your speech. When my dad got detained, I thought no one cared. But then I saw you. And now I want to be a teacher too, so I can be loud like you." Nia sat at her kitchen table holding the paper like it was made of glass. She didn't cry. She just sat still and let the quiet honor the moment. That same week, the city of Charlotte passed what they called the Thompson Amendment legislation, mandating bias training for every law enforcement officer and public servant involved in the community engagement. It passed unanimously. For the first time in years, even those who once remained silent stood up. Etta attended the signing ceremony wearing her best floral blouse and a white hat that tilted just enough to say, "My daughter did this." At the podium, the mayor turned to Nia. "You didn't ask for power," he said, "but you held it with dignity, and because of that, Charlotte is better." After the ceremony, as they stood under the North Carolina sun, Terrence tugged at Nia's elbow. "They're naming a scholarship after you," he said, "for students who want to teach." "I saw the poster in the hallway." She smiled. "I heard. But it's not really about me." "It is," he said. "You made them see us, not just you us." That night, the Freedom Park community held a candlelight walk. No chants, no microphones, just quiet steps, each one lit with memory. At the front of the park, where it had all begun, a new plaque had been placed. It read, "Here, Nia Thompson stood for justice. She taught, she endured, and she transformed a city." Nia touched the cool metal as the wind rustled through the trees. She thought back to the moment she'd been pulled from that very spot, cuffed bleeding, uncertain if anyone would even remember her name. Now that name didn't just belong to her. It belonged to every student who had ever been dismissed, every teacher who had ever been silenced, every citizen who had ever been told to step aside quietly. Later that evening, back at home, she opened her laptop and began drafting a new lesson plan, one not about injustice, but about rebuilding. Not about trauma, but about legacy. And across the country, thousands of students opened their textbooks and found her story printed on the first page of a new unit when justice stood up. Nia closed her laptop with a quiet click. Not because the work was done, but because the next lesson was ready. Spring brought warmth back to Charlotte, but it also brought reckoning. The civil suit against Agent Pierce moved into its final phase. Depositions were completed. Evidence was sealed, but expected to be explosive. Nia didn't attend every court date, but she followed every line of testimony. Her attorney Kendra sent her summaries with notes in the margins, angry, sharp, precise. And then came the email from the federal judge's office. Pierce had reached a settlement. He admitted to violating her civil rights. He agreed to surrender his security clearance. He would never work in federal law enforcement again. There was no celebration in Nia's house that night. No champagne. Just quiet. Etta cooked cornbread and black-eyed peas. Nia sat at the table staring at the flickering light of the stovetop. "It doesn't feel like victory," she said. Etta spooned peas onto her plate. "Because you weren't fighting for one man to fall, you were fighting for the system to answer." Nia nodded. "Then I wanted to speak louder." The next day she sent out an open letter. It wasn't about Pierce, it was about what followed. Injustice, as she wrote, is not always a shouting match. Sometimes it's a policy, a form, a delay, a look. If we're going to change it, we have to name it, document it, and dismantle it one rule at a time. The letter was published in the Washington Post, then read aloud on morning news shows, then taught in classrooms. At the same time, the Freedom Foundation announced something unexpected. Nia Thompson would be awarded the National Reform Medal, typically reserved for lawmakers, judges, and civil rights pioneers. They made an exception, because she made them reconsider the rules. In her acceptance speech at the ceremony in New York, she stood under a vaulted ceiling, lights warm above her, cameras blinking red across the hall. "I was arrested for standing still," she said, "but the system didn't expect me to stand again. And not just stand, but move, push, build, teach, change." Her voice grew stronger. "If you are told to be silent, speak louder. If you are told to move, plant your feet deeper. And if they try to erase your name, write it again everywhere in ink, in stone, and in the lives you touch." The crowd stood in a slow, powerful wave of applause. Terrence, watching from the front row, wiped his eyes. And beside him, Agent Hart stood quietly, hands folded. She hadn't worn a uniform since resigning, but she hadn't stopped working. Now she led a federal advisory board on ethics in field operations, formed in part because of her testimony. That night, back in her hotel room, Nia stared out at the skyline. She could see children walking home with backpacks slung low, streetlights flickering, buses gliding down Broadway. She thought about her students, her city, her mother. She picked up her phone and recorded a voice message for the next morning's podcast episode, a segment now streamed by over 500,000 listeners across the country. "This work is not glamorous," she said. "It doesn't always make headlines. But if you're tired, rest. If you're scared, breathe. And if you feel small, remember justice doesn't need you to be perfect. It just needs you to show up." She hit send. And for the first time in weeks, she let herself rest, wrapped, not in triumph, but in peace. Outside, a bus rolled past. On its side, a mural had been painted. A black woman standing tall in front of a chalkboard, eyes locked with the viewer. Underneath, in bold letters, "She taught us more than curriculum. She taught us courage." Under a clear blue sky, Freedom Park pulsed with life once more. Children laughed as they raced along the winding paths, their energy infectious. Parents gathered on benches, sharing smiles and stories. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and blooming dogwoods. Yet the heart of the park held something deeper. A new plaque stood proudly near the old podium, gleaming softly in the afternoon sun. Carved into the bronze was an inscription that would endure. Here stood Nia Thompson, educator, fighter, and beacon of hope. Her courage transformed a city and inspired a nation. Nia herself stood before the plaque, flanked by friends, students, and community leaders. Her eyes traced the letters slowly, each word anchoring years of struggle, pain, and relentless perseverance. The crowd around her was a tapestry of faces young and old, all touched by the ripples she had set in motion. A small voice tugged at her hand. Terrence, now confident and grown, smiled up at her. "Miss Nia," he said softly, "thank you for never letting us be invisible." She knelt to meet his gaze. "You were never invisible, Terrence. You just needed someone to see you." Behind them, cameras captured the moment, a celebration not just of one woman, but of every teacher who dared to stand, every student who dared to learn, and every community that refused to be silenced. The ceremony concluded with Nia stepping up to speak, her voice steady and full of warmth. "This plaque is more than a marker," she said. "It's a reminder that justice isn't a destination, but a daily choice. That education is the bridge between fear and understanding." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle like gentle rain. "We've come far, but our journey continues. We owe it to every child to build a world where dignity isn't questioned by the color of your skin, where voices rise not in protest alone, but in promise." As applause swelled around her, Nia's heart swelled too, with gratitude, hope, and a fierce determination. Later that evening, in the quiet of her home, Nia opened a new folder labeled Curriculum Reform. She began writing lesson plans filled with stories of resilience, truth, and empowerment. Her pen moved with purpose, guided by the voices of the past and the promise of the future. Outside, the city lights blinked on one by one, weaving a tapestry of possibilities. Nia smiled softly, knowing this was just the beginning.